of Zen explores the often overlooked ways in which professional, personal, and spiritual growth are interrelated. We dive deep into the life teachings of the Buddha and the mindfulness practices of Zen, revealing how they can help us dramatically expand our possibilities for wholehearted work, life, and play.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Game of Zen podcast. This is Scott Berman checking in from Philadelphia, PA. As always, joined by Paul Gyodo Agostinelli from Boulder. Paul, good to see you. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, Scott. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm coming back from a soccer tournament in Las Vegas. I played a bunch of games there over the weekend, so I'm feeling a little sore, but otherwise doing really well here in Colorado.
All right. Well, we're thrilled today to have a special guest. Mark Thornton is checking in here from West Palm Beach, Florida. Good afternoon, Mark. Thanks for hopping on today.
Hey, James. How you doing? I really loved hearing the intro piece. It's like, that's right on. So I'm really excited and honored to be here, frankly. So.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, I'm going to give a little intro for Mark, and then we'll kick it off. So Mark is a best-selling author on meditation. Meditation in a New York Minute, Super Calm for the Super Busy is the title. Former Chief Operating Officer for JPMorgan Private Bank in London. Created leadership and meditation programs for Wharton Business School, Philadelphia, PA, and taught for 9 years. He also taught the Inner Dimension of Leadership at Harvard Law School, the program on negotiation with Erica Fox. Mark trains senior leaders for Fortune 50 companies, sharing timeless wisdom in real-world settings. Mark is from Australia, husband to Charlotte, father to a 6-year-old boy's son. That's a cool name. Mark, great accomplishments. Love to hear more about your background and how you wrote the book.
I'm always uncomfortable with those intros because I could equally do one of listing all my failures and my shortcomings and the areas where I'm not successful. So consider that intro as like my business persona, but I check in as a man who's as hopeful and challenged and struggling as everyone else. So how did I write the book? So I grew up with two parents, mum and a dad, and my dad had he was like a Sunday Catholic, and when I was 12 years old, he was diagnosed with cancer and given 6 months to live. And I remember we went to a Sunday church, as we always did, and there, like in the lobby or the foyer, there was a group of like Christians with a strong faith. And they said, "Listen, we've heard about your diagnosis, and we're gonna pray for you, and we think you're going to get better." And my dad said, "Okay, I have like a death warrant from Western medicine, but if you want to, then go for it." So they did, and he did. So he lived for 25 years.
Wow.
So he became a man of sort of faith. When I was 13, he came into my bedroom and said, "Oh, can I pray with you?" And I said, "Whatever." I didn't have a good relationship with my dad at all, and that was the moment. That was the moment when I really kind of had my awakening experience. So I was pulled into or experienced states that were way beyond what I'd ever experienced before. And that was my awakening. And I mentioned that as a preface because I then became an investment banker in London, which is pretty much where awakening goes to die. So in my 20s in London, I would describe myself as a hyped up, caffeine-addicted, stressed junkie. You know, I was so stressed. I was grinding my teeth so badly at night. My dentist told me to wear a mouth guard, and I was losing my hair. So, you know, apart from thinking I was going to be bald and toothless by 30, I was also thinking, God, these are just the external signs of stress. Like, what's actually happening inside me? So I felt very, very lost, as a banker, like in my 20s, like very lost, unable to find my core, my depth, my heart. I was pulled into ways to try and feel myself that were both either extreme, some legal, maybe some less legal. And it was really hard for me because I'd had this awakening before. I knew there was something. And I couldn't weave it into my everyday life, much like the theme of this podcast. So, and the teachers I would spend time with, were saying things. It's 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night. I mean, I didn't have 20 minutes for my girlfriend, let alone 20 minutes for my spiritual practice. And I felt bad about that. Like, I was, God, my spirituality was a way to feel bad about myself. Like, oh, I'm not committed enough. I'm not a deep enough man. I'm not spiritual enough, all those things. It turns out in my experience that I didn't have the practices that I could artfully weave into moment by moment. So I got really, really passionate and curious about how do I have my spirituality not only just thrive me personally, but to make a difference. And ultimately, could my spirituality actually be felt by those around me? So I've trained with like 5 different teachers, and in my experience, each one of them had like one facet of the diamond, but no one had the whole diamond. So I got really curious about what of the thousands and thousands of spiritual practices, paths to the heart, paths to depth, what could really work for me and support my life. Because I love banking, I was good at it, and I love my spirituality as well. So, but really importantly, none of the people who were my teachers had ever lived and worked on the trading room floor in a bank in London. So it was just, so I had to find this on my own in some way. I was very lucky to meet people who could teach me practices, and particularly some Buddhist practices, so I could start to weave them into my everyday life. And I remember my life sort of changed when I was appointed COO for the private bank. My very first day, we'd bought another bank and we were in charge of merging it onto our platform, a bank called Robert Fleming's, and it was a disaster. And we were 25 million pounds over budget. We were a year late. The people we'd bought hated us, and 70% of them wanted to leave, and it was like a bona fide sort of crisis. And so I was taking action and doing things, and someone came up to me and said, "How can you be so calm in the midst of all this?" And I realized I was. It was the most senior position I'd had, and yet I could do it from a place of center. And that was a real sign for me that the practice had borne some fruit. So I remember when I first felt called to write the book, I was standing on a train station, a tube station in London, and I was standing sort of by the edge, and I was doing a mindfulness practice. And for me, mindfulness, the way I was taught, was everything in your physical body, being aware of all of that, everything in the senses external to you, and then both at the same time. And when I did that practice, I remember having this experience, and I apologize talking about my experiences, but it's kind of what led me to writing the book. But I had this experience of just seeing a different strata of life or the universe, and I could see suddenly energy. Some traditions call it divine light, some people call it different terms, but for me it was like, and in that moment that it happened, I thought, oh my God, I'm having a stroke. So I took 2 steps back from the platform in case I fell over. But as soon as I stopped the practice, it went away. So I gently started the practice again, and there it was. And it wasn't like anything dramatic. It was as natural as a drop of water hitting the ocean. It was just very simple, very direct, very immediate, nothing. There was no anyway, so I got on the tube, practiced it again, I could see it there. That day, I was chairing a meeting of board of directors for a fund. And my role was to introduce people. So I introduced people, and in the times that I wasn't speaking, I could do this practice again. And there in the boardroom, at JPMorgan. It was the same experience. And that's when I realized that what all the saints and sages and masters have always said, that, you know, no matter where you are, there is the divine. You know, it's not what the fact I was wearing a suit and tie that stopped that. So it was a really profound moment for me in my life of understanding, you know, there's a very ancient, timeless message. It's not mine. It's like, no matter where you are, you have that access. You have that. You are that. So that was when I felt very called to write the book. So I remember very clearly, I went to my boss. His name was Gary Tucker, good friend today. And I remember asking for a year off. And he said, "What for?" And I said, "I want to write a book." And he just thought for a while, and then he just slowly shook his head and he said, "You know, we don't do that at JPMorgan." Then rather unhelpfully, he said, "We give time off if you're pregnant." And I said, "I'm pregnant with a book."
Okay.
And he said, "Yeah, it's not going to work." But in that moment, I had another experience, a very visceral experience. Imagine if your intuition or your deepest self was like, you know, grabbing you by the shirt collars and pulling you away. You're going to leave and not come back. So that's what I did. So I went to write my book. I spent 50 weeks of 1 year in spiritual retreats. I went to 13 different countries, met 32 different teachers, met my wife in the 4th month.
Wow.
Even though I've been practicing since I was 13. And that's the moment that I knew I'd write the book. So
that is great, Mark. And I want to welcome you. I've been looking forward to the conversation. You have your background, as you just shared a bit of, is an uncommon combination of real high level, you know, high stress professional accomplishment, along with real deep, you know, spiritual practice and meditative practice. And it is uncommon. And these days, you know, we need people like you to help others who are in the chaos of the modern world. Yeah, that's beautiful, Mark. I want to welcome you to the podcast, and I've been looking forward to talking with you. You have a very uncommon combination of, you know, high-level professional accomplishment, but also deep spiritual practice that you're, you know, integrating into that world. And I, you know, personally feel like the world needs that right now with all of the chaos that's going on. We need to get those who are very active in, you know, the matters of the world to develop and cultivate their own inner wisdom and centeredness. So I'm appreciating our conversation. Thanks for joining. We have this expression, after the awakening, the laundry, you know, which you've heard of. And as you were talking, I was like, well, after awakening, investment banking. And it's true. That's what, you know, it's the work of the world. And to bring that contact with the divine, the depth of samadhi, concentrative energy into those environments is what we need to do. You know, anybody could go and do its 10-day retreat and bliss out and become very centered, but it's most needed, you know, in the activity of the world. And you're on the front lines of doing that. So I really appreciate it. My first question comes from that, is you have been doing this for a long time, helping others to say, contact, you know, this depth of concentrative body-mind awareness in the work world. I doubt that many are having, you know, spiritual breakthroughs in the boardroom the way you were able to kind of do that. Do you see that the people you work with in terms of executives and you know, board members who you're teaching through your teachings? And we should mention, you know, your book is Meditation in a New York Minute, super calm for the super busy. I love it. Are they really able to make a transformative kind of access, you know, to that mind, you know, through these accessible practices that you give them? How's it going?
Yeah. So I've been really in the question for since 2001 of how do we language and bridge the world of deep insight, practice, and spirituality into everyday life. So I've always been curious about what's a model of spirituality that is not separate out of life to a mountaintop or a monastery or an ashram, but how do you cultivate that in the world, on the trading floor, walking down the street, those sort of things. So that for me has felt what was needed. And the book, really, the inside of the book really is that it's meditation in New York Minute, which means just small micro doses of practice that can add up to an hour a day, but cumulatively, not consecutively. And that was the breakthrough. And just to share about that, my experience was that, my mind was like my hand, like it would like grip and tighten. But from a moment of breath or mindfulness, it softens a little bit and then it grips again. Another breath, it softens a bit. But eventually that sort of opening and closing, that's where you start to have your mind as servant rather than in control. But it was the constant interruption of the mind over a period during my waking days that created the spaciousness, the openness. And there is no way I would have been able to get to where I got to in banking without my spiritual practice, 100%. I would have died of a heart attack at age 30. Mm-hmm. I linked very much, like one-to-one correlation for my spiritual practice to my success. Like breaking the correlation that stress equals results. No. If you make that correlation, any result you want, you'll always create stress. How about if effortless, easy, natural? I got even more results. So in terms of other leaders, so I remember sitting in the basement of two very good friends of mine, Amy Fox and her sister, Erica Fox. And it was 2002 in Boston. And Erica's on the faculty at Harvard Law School. And we had just heard that McKinsey & Co. in Australia had just run a leadership training program with a very extreme spiritual teacher. And we were like, what? Like, it was mind-blowing for us. And it was they worked with a big bank called ANZ Bank in Australia, financial services, the exact opposite of tree hugging and crunchy granola and softness. And they did it and they were talking about it. And so we sat there and thought, now's the time. Now's the time. What can we do? So Erica's response was to create a research team at the program on negotiation at the law school, thinking about what do wisdom traditions have to offer us as leaders, if anything. Let's explore. Mm-hmm. So we have spent a long time trying to find what's the language, what's the framework, what are the modules that really work for really busy leaders. So I apologize. My work has a quite narrow base. So it's really not with companies generally. It's just with big companies and just with very senior people. So it may not be that relevant to other things. It's quite narrow in a way. But the company that Erica and Amy founded is called Mobius Executive Leadership, and they are the world's best at teaching leadership and bridging leadership informed from these different wisdom traditions. So, I really sit on their shoulders in teaching this stuff, and they've been remarkably successful. Like, what is it? How do you go into a cold room with 30 people and have it be just an impactful success? And I've done it over and over again, and it's been extraordinary. But my book first came out, I had a little business card that said, what did it say? It said spirituality in business. And I was invited, this is 2004, I think, and I was invited to a conference at Goldman Sachs in New York City. I was thinking, oh my God. I was standing in the lobby and everyone's like networking and business cards. And I was thinking, I've got this thing burning in my pocket. Dude, I'm the only guy here with corporate spirituality. That's for sure. The guy came up to me, gave me his business card. I'm thinking, oh my God, should I just not even pull this thing out? Pull it out, corporate spirituality, all through the book. And he holds it for a while. I'm thinking, this is not going to go well. And he goes, this is great. I'm a Buddhist. Nice. The next person. It was like experience after like that. So the world is thirsty. The world is thirsty for this stuff. It's not for everyone. My sense is someone was saying no one's going to do this on Wall Street. I reckon about 85% of people are not interested in this in Wall Street. I think 10% are a little bit curious, but 5% are like, are you kidding me? Hell yeah. They are thirsty. They are thirsty for this stuff. So I feel the gentleman on this call, we all have a calling to share this. And I love, Paul, what you shared privately about creating bodhisattvas on the path. Like, yes.
Yeah. I think it's especially important in those high stress, high profile jobs where there's way more opportunity to get burnt out or stressed out or anxious. And the highest levels, it's important at every level for any level of work that you do. So I really commend you on going into those boardrooms with that message. That's awesome. I'm curious what happened before you wrote the book, when you quit your job and you left and you went on a year trip, 32 countries. And tell me more about like the spiritual teachers and some of the more unique experiences that led you back to now.
Yeah. So it was kind of amazing back then that I could actually stack like 50 weeks of that year with nothing other than spiritual retreats. I mean, that's kind of amazing, all from very, very different sources and things. So, before that, like in London, I would have 4 weeks a year holiday, probably 3 weeks in some dance club in Ibiza, and then 1 week in spiritual retreats. And that changed to 2 weeks of spiritual retreats and 2 weeks in Ibiza, and eventually it changed. But it's a real subculture. Like, spirituality is a real subculture. And when you're in it, then you hear about, this teacher, Paul's here, those things. So my experience of that was, some teachers were sublime, some were, completely crazy. Like, seriously, completely crazy. For me, my experience was, I was practicing listening from my heart, not from my mind. So some teachers would say things that were quite beautiful, that my mind would go, oh, yeah, great, beautiful. But my heart wouldn't move at all. Whereas other teachers would say things that my mind's going, what's that about? But my heart would soften, would open. And I really trusted that response, the pull of the heart, the response of the heart. So it gave me, it was a deepening in my own practice. I tried many things. It really kind of, honestly, it's one of the best years I've had in life, to dedicate my life to what I most deeply care about, what I'm most passionate about. So extraordinary, mind-blowing, yeah.
Well, you've really been fed through a number of different seeds of spiritual practice to produce, the culture of your own consciousness. That you're bringing forth here and teaching. It's great. I was very, and am very, very intrigued and fascinated by the project of relanguaging the language of spirituality in the professional sphere, to bring it forth. And I've been engaged in that same project for the last 20 years myself with the work that I do. Even the title Game of Zen of this podcast was a way for me and Scott to kind of, put forth the practices and principles of Zen in a way that people could kind of get a handle on, which we're kind of developing. So I'm curious about that, like how you said you did a lot of work on that. And, I wrote a newsletter a few months ago, and I said 7 words you can't say at work. And they included sacred, spirit, soul, divine, these things, God, of course, that kind of goes without saying. So how is that going for you? And is there has that shifted at all? Is there more of a readiness? Does your translation, is that evolving? Yeah, I'd love to hear just, how that's been for you.
Yeah. Well, it's been beautiful, but beautiful to witness the work of people like Erica and Amy. It's just, and to be honest, like the first few years I was Erica's co-teacher at the law school, and she was coming up with practices, and I was coming up with practices that were like that did not go well.
Mm.
So there was a constant calibration. And I think I think I've been extraordinarily passionate about demystifying wisdom traditions. Like it always, I found a lot of spiritual paths use a lot of like Sanskrit, for example, or terms that people are like, I don't know what it is. And so I was always passionate about reaching people who were untouched by this material. So my book isn't about Zen or mention anything, it's about meditation in a New York minute. I remember I had a phone call with the publisher, Tammy Simon, who published the book, and before it was published, she said, I don't think we can publish this. I said, why not? She goes, well, because, I've been a serious, committed, deep Vipassana and Vajra practicer for like 30 years. And here you're telling people you can do it in a New York minute, I said, but Tammy, my book is not for you. I don't kind of care about people that are on the path. I'm passionate about the people. Like I'm moved even thinking about it. I'm passionate about the people that are untouched by the extraordinary gifts you men have on this call. How do we share that?
That's awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think the number one reason when I talk about meditation, the number one reason I hear from other people is I'm too busy for it. And then the second question is, how long do you do it for? And I say, listen, you could do it for 2 minutes. I was just heating up my tea in the microwave, and I sat there and took 4 or 5 deep breaths while I was waiting for my tea. Just those kind of things. And I think that's why the demystifying is so important, especially because everyone's got busy lives. We have information overload. I think, as Paul talks about a lot, there's a chaos out there. The more we rely on this, the more we get by in our lives in a better way. I am curious, though, your reaction. How many people, not exactly, but have responded to you and said, hey, Mark, I read your book and this happened or that happened? Like, what kind of feedback do you get from readers?
Oh, gosh. I think one of the things that touched me the most was a very good friend of mine in Australia. They gave my book to their 92-year-old mum who was in hospital, very ill, and had been an atheist all her life. And she said that she really, really enjoyed the book. And I was like, oh, that's a beautiful thing. I remember I was teaching in Argentina. I was dragged to some soccer match, and there was like 25,000 people in it. I'm like, oh, that's actually how many people have purchased my book. 25,000 people at least. It's like this. So the other experiences of people just I think it's the exhale and relief of finding an oasis in a desert of busyness and calm. It's that sort of exhale. It's being able to taste the nourishment and the liquid water that is just so much nurturing for the soul in some way. So yeah. Like some companies like McKinsey bought it and gave 300 copies to their team and somewhere or other and things like that. So which is also really touching. So.
I'm really encouraged by that reception, and of course this is subtle, these are things, people, it takes time for people to cultivate, the qualities of mind, but it's good to know it's happening. You just don't even, you don't always recognize that. And even the people themselves don't always recognize it for a period of time. So, but I think the things that you're pointing to are an indication of the expansion of this kind of level of consciousness, across the board. I'm curious. My intuition is that we are entering a very profound shift, in global consciousness right now. AI is a part of it. I think non-human intelligence, there's a lot coming out around that I think is going to come into our consciousness. Obviously, the geopolitics and global situation is in rapid transformation. And so I feel like now is the time when this sort of work is needed very prominently. And I wonder if you sense that, if you sense it in your work, if you sense it in the people that you're in community with, whether you feel there's an intensification of the, world consciousness that certainly could use, this level of consciousness that we're talking about raising. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So even like a decade ago or longer, what I was noticing was that people were having awakenings completely outside traditions, religions, spiritual paths. Byron Katie is an example of that. Eckhart Tolle is an example. But they just publish their authors, but like people are just waking up. So consciousness is spreading like a wildfire. It doesn't necessarily need a match to light it. It could be a person at home coming online. So that's been happening for a long time. What's very different in this chapter is the sense of the rapid cycling. So it's important in the communities I'm in to understanding the purpose of the rapid cycling. And the purpose, in my experience, feel free to jump in, is consciousness is bumping up against our own limitations faster and faster. So it's an invitation, again, not so much to find refuge in ourselves, that's very, very important and much needed, but also to find ways to skillfully work with what's bumped into. Because the experience for most of us is that it's not a relaxing opening, it's not a deepening, it's like the stuff that's blocking us is boom, like how do you deal with that? So life is calling us into a path of healing and nurture. So I think it's the finding refuge in self as much as working out how do we deal with the stuff that I've not looked at that's now here.
Yeah.
And how do I be with that? So, and it's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, just to share a very transparent story, this morning I spent a lot of time with my wife, and it was really clear to me that one of the models of spirit going forward is finding that in relationship. So, and that for me, I was very much coming up against blockages in my own heart, which was so actually painful to experience as my heart wanted to open. And I said to her, wow, this is really painful. This is hard to open, because she's an extraordinary woman. She could be with me in that. I mention it because, one, bumping into things, that's hard work. Healing them, moving through them, having skills to be with that is hard work. And also the possibility in a relationship to have someone that can help me with that stuff. So
yeah. Yeah, I do see it the same way. And, my noting is that the ages of the greatest spiritual depth in terms of collective, awakening are times of great challenge and great tumult. For that very reason is that it's the obstacle that provides, in a sense, the fuel for the work, right? So we come to work. We come to the work because of something that isn't working. That's something that is off. You could say it's the anomaly. And you had referenced the kind of the head and the heart, earlier in our conversation. And sometimes the head, the wisdom energy, resonates more, and sometimes it's the compassion energy. But those are the two primary modalities of awakened consciousness: is the wisdom and compassion, the head and the heart. So when we come up against something that doesn't make sense, right, that doesn't align with your truth, then you need to expand your wisdom eye to find out what is the truth that is going on here. And likewise, when we come up to a heart, a relationship that has a challenging aspect to it, that we are called upon to open the heart to really be with really what's going on, right? So I see it the same way you do. I like the way you put that, is it's a process of fuel almost for the awakening, and it's intensifying. So we almost, I believe this, when even 40 or 50 years ago, of course, now we're talking about the 60s when this was happening again. So we had that sort of fuel happening, but maybe we go 70 years back, there perhaps wasn't that type of fuel. So people, needed to do 10-day retreats or 7-day retreats. And now there almost is, I think, the possibility of profound awakening when we bring a disciplined practice just to what's going on in our daily lives.
It's almost as you're talking, Paul, that the book you referenced before, like after enlightenment, the laundry. But in this chapter, it's after enlightenment, the healing. Like, do some healing work.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The compassion work, goes. It all goes on and on. The wisdom and the compassion. Right. Wisdom is the substance of compassion, and compassion is the function of wisdom.
Oh, beautiful.
And you can be in like this state, and maybe some of those teachers who are a little bit off that you were referring to, they can be in a really brilliant wisdom place. They see things very clearly, but they're not working in relation, as you just said, in accord with that wisdom, to really meet people's suffering, including one's own suffering, in a way that's wholehearted. And that does include most essentially feeling the suffering. Feeling that, like you said with your wife, to be with that. That's what compassion means: suffering with, feeling with. So avoiding that leads to ignorance and to the suffering that comes from attachment, because aversion is a form of attachment. Feeling it leads to wisdom and compassionate action. So
beautiful. Very, very timely advice.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting with the teaching that you've done through your book, Mark, and Paul, you do through your newsletter. And the practice is what we always talk about, is that the more you practice, the more you learn from teachers. I like how you said there's different teachers along the way, and you learn something from everyone, some more and some less. But for me, the practice of working with Paul for all these years has really taught me a lot that I apply in my everyday life and my work life. And reading this book is the same way. So I think that the idea is you get these inputs from all over the place, and then you apply them, and they sort of stack up on each other. And then years later, you can see a big difference. I am curious about the colleges, the business schools. It seems to me that this would be an excellent course in business school at Wharton or somewhere. And I wonder, do they teach, when they're teaching these people how to be the big executives, do they bring any of this into the mix, and should they?
Yeah. So Wharton Business School reached out to me in 2004, and they wanted me to create a program on leadership and meditation practice, because their students were asking for it. So it was with the leadership program down there. Wharton has about 850 students, first and second year MBAs, and I think like more than 500 or 600 had signed up to do the program. So I taught there for like 9 years in spring and fall. And again, it's a sign of the next generation back then that they're thirsty for this stuff. They're thirsty for this stuff, but also thirsty for this stuff taught by someone who understands their world that they want to get into.
Right.
So the director of the program said half the people want to be in investment banking. So the fact that you can talk about doing that thing with calm and center, that's a good thing. So yes, of course they should. Of course business schools should. And it was part of their competitive advantage that they were offering this to MBAs when other schools weren't. So. But now we live in a world where San Francisco airport and there's meditation lounges. It's all changing so fast.
They don't have those in Philadelphia airport, by the way. But
yeah.
Mark, I'm curious. I have this model of the three contracts, I call them, self, work, and other, that I derived from David White's work. He's got a book called The Three Marriages. Are you familiar with that work?
David White, as in the poet.
Yeah, he's a poet, but he's done a lot of like spiritual work in corporations, as you and I do. I've
taught with him.
Oh, wonderful!
He's come on our program a couple of times.
Okay, So I don't know if you're familiar with his book. He called it The Three Marriages, self, work, and other. And that was a big inspiration for me when I read it 20 years ago. And I came to see that there's these three sacred areas of our life: our self-development, we could say it, our soul or our spiritual path. There's our relational path, and then there's the work path, right? So our culture kind of recognizes, the sacredness of marriage, and we take marriage vows, which people take more or less seriously. And then, sacredness in the self realm is just, it's the priests and the monks and the religious people who are concerned with that. But I'm not sacred. I don't have a sacredness myself, largely. And then on the work side, it's like, work's not sacred. What's that? Maybe if you work for a nonprofit, you might tell yourself that. But I think there's so much suffering just baked into that, looking at the world that way, looking at our lives that way. All three of those areas are very sacred. But there's a real art to aligning and balancing the sacred path in each of those three areas. That's what I've found. So, early in my career, I did come to a point where I was a resident at the Zen Center of Los Angeles. I was 26, 27 years old. I had taken the Buddhist vows, and I was really on fire with the Dharma. And there was a big part of me that wanted to just become a monk and just, devote myself to that path. But I did have a deeper, wiser voice that said, no, there are these areas of your life with respect to relationships and with respect to profession, work, that you're going to bypass if you do that. And those are just as important, and you have to integrate them. So I actually went against, that strong desire to really expand my life. And I'm so glad I did. It's been in some ways a more difficult path. In some ways being a dedicated practitioner is kind of easy. Once you get it down, it really is. But to really align those and really honor the sacredness of all three of those is quite challenging. And that's something that that I've explicitly applied myself to helping people to do, because I felt like I found a way to do that. I kind of stumbled my way through it. But one thing that I used to do that is that I did put my spiritual development at the front. I said, that's the front wheel of my tricycle. And I will align my relationships and I'll align my work with that spiritual development. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to do those things, right? I'm not going to, but I need that alignment. So I don't know. I'm curious, your thoughts on that sort of framework, and whether you see people being challenged by an over compartmentalization of their life.
So what I hear as you're sharing is the invitation to sacredness in those domains, and how few take that thing. So, for example, in the domain of work, that's a platform for the expression of love and wisdom. I mean, what a profound way to be in service to your team, your company, your community. What a profound way to look at ways to give love and compassion. I mean, the more sacredness we recognize in those domains, the more aligned we are. And I think in my invitation to the coaching I do with leaders, it's very much to find anew the sacredness of that, to put a very different frame around, I'm a cog in a wheel, I'm a 9 to 5, I'm a this, to you're up to a bigger game. And that game is, how do you embody and magnify love at the workplace? How do you do that? So it's a question to invite them to explore. My very first teacher, his name's Ken Miller in Australia, and he said this thing that I love. He said, Mark, you can be sweeping the streets and have your heart as open, as wide as the sun. It doesn't matter what you do, garbage, COO, that's irrelevant. Is your heart open like the sun? So I invite leaders to get curious about those framings, because People got up with, oh, doing good means a non-profit. No. Sweep the streets with your heart as radiant as the sun. That's the thing. So, for example, like in my work in banking, like we'd have these annual appraisal things, and when I got committed to this path, I used that as a stage or a forum within which to make sure that there were no appreciations or acknowledgements or honoring of that person that was left on the table. Why? I'm in the game of love. I want to lead. I want to lead with love. Just one example, So it transformed how I both gave the annual sort of appraisal, but it trained my eye throughout the year to start to track things about them very precisely. So it's just a small example, but
So this has really been fantastic, Mark. I just want to thank you again for joining us today. And once again, the book is Meditation in a New York Minute. And I love how you say you can be super busy, super successful, and super calm at the same time in a New York minute. So I love that. Tell us anything else, final thoughts of how to reach out to you or anything else about the book.
Book's on Amazon. You can Google me, reach out. My email direct line is mark@b4p.us. It's MARK at letter B, number 4, letter P.us. My 2 favorite Zen quotes. You ready?
Yeah.
In meditation, there are only ever beginners. Some of us have been beginning for longer.
That's great.
Love it.
The other one it's something that is very challenging for me, but to disturb something is to be attached to it.
That's great.
God, you can just feel what am I disturbing? What am I attached to? Both inside me, my own identity, my own things outside. So
Nice.
my 2 favorite Zen quotes.
I love it. And thank you, everyone, for listening today. And don't forget to check out the Zen at Work newsletter on Substack to get more of Paul's wisdom. And really appreciate you joining today, Mark, and always appreciate you, Paul. And we'll see you again soon with a new episode. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration into Zen Buddhism and its transformative influence on work and life. We hope you'll subscribe, share, and comment wherever you get your podcasts. May your journey be one of continuous growth and mindful living. From all of us here at Game of Zen, wishing you peace and prosperity on your path ahead.